Everybody, welcome to Chin Fat. This is the third episode I've got in this series on the Sony FX3, and in this episode I'm showing how the exposure index works. So we're setting up the camera to shoot at 2 base ISOs, and those will not change. It will change from 800 to 12,800, but they won't be varied. Like I won't go down to ISO 400. You won't be able to since I'm shooting in the Cine EI mode. And the Cine EI mode will only allow you to shoot in a base ISO of 800 and a base ISO of 12,800. So what that basically does is it gives you your kind of regular cinema shooting at the ISO 800 and gives you your low light shooting at 12,800. And then what we're going to do is we're going to test some different exposures. We're going to look at the log footage and see what the difference is in the exposures. And then what we did with the exposure index is we went through with the exposure index dial and lit as if we were shooting, say the outside footage we're shooting 800. We changed the exposure index to pretend like we are actually exposing our camera at 1600, which is one stop brighter than 800. So that's twice as bright, twice the amount of light coming in as 800. But actually the camera is not being changed. It's going, when you're changing the exposure index, it looks like you are changing the exposure, but you're actually not. So it is staying at 800. And same thing if you're shooting at 12,800 and you change the exposure index, it acts as if you're letting either less or more light in. In that instance, when you're trying to preserve the shadows, it acts as if you're turning down the ISO from maybe 12,800 to 6,400, which is one stop lower than that, or we're even going to go down to 3,200 and show that if it's 2 stops lower. So the exposure index makes it look like it is letting less light in because it looks like it's showing as if it's changing the ISO, but it's not. It is keeping it at either 800 ISO or 12,800 ISO. And now the reason why we do that is because we are trying to preserve, because when we're shooting in 800 ISO, we're trying to preserve the highlights, and if we're shooting in 12,800, we're trying to get rid of the noise in the low lights. Because when you boost your ISO up to 12,800, it's going to really add a lot of grain in the darks on that. And we are going to change the exposure. We're going to tell it that we're shooting in a lower ISO, which makes us put more light into the camera. Or if we were shooting at 800 ISO, we're bumping the ISO up, and then it thinks that we need less light on it, so we're letting less light in, and that's going to preserve the highlights. So it's a kind of a new concept to wrap your brain around, but as you start shooting and you kind of see the results that you get, it will hopefully start clicking in your head as far as why the Sony FX and also the Sony FX30 does this new Cine EI, has this new Cine EI feature. So here's some footage here. I brought the footage in Resolve, and we've got the footage the way it is shot in the camera. Now this is one thing that the Sony FX3 does when it's in the Cine EI mode, is it displays a LUT over your image. So right now this is looking very, very flat. If we look at this image, this looks like a very flat image. This is an S-Log3 that it shoots, and it's always, and when it's in Cine EI, it's always shooting in that S-Log3 mode. And that's the look that you're getting right there, is this very flat look. But when you're shooting in the camera, what you can do on the camera, and we discussed this in the earlier episode, is you can basically tell it to display a LUT in the EI mode, the exposure index mode. It'll do two things when you put it in the Cine EI mode. It will display it as if you were shooting in a different ISO other than 800 or 12,800. It will show you what your exposure would look like when it's color graded. And then it will also show a LUT, a Rec 709 LUT, so it doesn't look so flat. So, and I'll show you what that's going to look like right here. So we're inside of Resolve here, and here's some of the footage that we've shot. First of all, let's go over the low light stuff. The low light, we shot at an ISO of 12,800. And then we displayed in the Cine exposure index mode, which gives it, first of all, that Rec 709 look. I'm going to add a node here because I want to show you what we can do. I'm going to add a LUT that is a conversion from Sony S-Log3 to Rec 709. I'm going to add that, and you notice all of a sudden it gets really, really contrasty. It might look a little too dark. So what I'm using this first node as is if that LUT comes on too strong, I can use this first node to control the exposure before it even enters this LUT. So I'm going to grab this exposure and play around with it and see how that brings some details back in our darks. But I'm going to try to get it to where it looks like it matches exposures from each shot here. So what I did on these, so this is the first shot. This shot was, there we go. Get your fat fingers out of the way. Right there. Let's zoom up to that there. So what we've got here is we stayed consistent. The light was 3200 Kelvin that I was using. So I was using kind of warmer light, and we're shooting at a 12,800 ISO. And then the exposure index is at 12,800 as well. So that's what it's displaying it at, as if I'm shooting at 12,800. And this is actually what the ISO is. So I shot at I got this where it was properly exposed between an f11 and this is called an 11-16 split. This is one stop of light. 16 is one stop of light darker than 11, which is cutting the light in half, and I want to split in between there. So it's an 11-16 split on the ISO on this shot specifically. On the exposure index is 12,800. So let's zoom out. Shift Z here to zoom back out. And I'm going to get this where it kind of looks like it's properly exposed. Maybe for face, I'm going to expose for the skin tones here. So I'm going to go to our brightness levels. This, once again, this node is the LUT, but I'm going to change the brightness level a little dimmer here. Let's go right about there. So I can really check out the darks. So what we're looking for is are the darks in here. So now what I did on this shot right here, this one, I'm going to borrow that LUT from this one here. Or that node tree. I'm going to move my mouse over and do a middle click, and I borrowed that. And this, we changed the exposure. So let's look at our slate here. This second shot, I changed the f-stop to compensate down one full stop from 11-16 split to 8-11 split. So I am doubling the amount of light coming into the camera here by going from 11-16 split to 8-11 split. And then we changed our ISO, keep in mind, is still shooting at 12,800, but it is displaying as if we were shooting in 6,400. That's our exposure index right there. And that there is looking like it is about double the exposure of this one here, and it is. But if you look at this with just the log footage here, I'm going to do Shift D and turn off my nodes. And we go to the previous one and go Shift D and turn off our nodes. The log looks similar, but here I've opened up the iris by one stop, so it is brighter. But when we look at it graded here, it looks too bright, so I can grab my first node and turn down the exposure. And look how the detail comes right back in her face there. And I can tell that my darks are getting really dark now, that my darks are getting really clean just by doing this by the exposure index by one stop. So actually we're letting more light in the camera by thinking that we're shooting at 6400, which is less bright. So we're adding more light to our camera here. So by changing the f-stop and opening up the iris there. So let's go to the third one. And this, of course, is looking brighter than the previous two. So I'm going to go middle click. We're going to add that. And of course, now it looks like we're losing detail. And this is at 30. Sorry, let's go to our slate here. This is at 3200 exposure index. So I compensated by going to, so now it looks like I'm exposing for 3200, where we're still exposing it at 12,800. But I opened up my iris a little bit more to one more stop, 5/6/8 split, which means that is twice the amount of light coming into the camera as our previous one right here, as this one right here. That's my second one, and then the first one is even one stop less than that, 11-16. So we're going from the 11-16 to 8-11, and then to 5.68. So we've increased it. If you're looking here from one shot to the next, increased it by one stop, because we're treating it as if our ISO is getting knocked down by one stop each time. So here we went from 6400 to 3200 for my third picture here, and we're shooting at 5/6/8. We're looking at a 5.68 split. And now when we zoom out, and we look at this image. Let's get this image where it's exposed properly by going to our first node and turning down the exposure on that before it even hits the LUT. And there we go. So all three of those look like they're pretty the same. Let's look at each one. It looks like they're about the exact same exposure. That one's maybe a little brighter. Let's turn that one down and try to get these to where they match. Oh, there we go. Okay, those look like, they're looking at her face, those look like they match brightness levels there. We've color corrected these so they look like they're all matching. But the first one was all three of these were shot at 12,800, but we exposed as if we were shooting at 12,800 for the first one, 6,400 for the next one, and then 3,200 for the third one. And if we look at these just in S-Log, you'll notice that it gets a stop brighter every time I go from the first one to the second one to the next one. But let's go to the first one. This is why we kind of intentionally overexpose this. So it brings up the dark levels, and it kills not all the noise, but a lot of the noise. What I'm going to do here is we're going to zoom up to this here. So let's go Option F, And we're going to look very closely at the darks when we play this back here. So we're going to play this back and watch really closely for the noise in this spot. Oh, you can see the noise all over. Look at that dancing all over the place right there. So in the darks, we have a lot of noise. And let's see, when we go over, I pan this over to the dark area here. So you can even see some noise there. Not as bad in the brightness levels, but here in the darks, you can see all this bouncing noise through there. So all that bouncing noise. Let's go to the next one here. Now let's play this back. This is at a different exposure index here. This is at 6400 exposure index, and the noise is still there, but it's looking cleaner. I'm seeing a lot less noise than I did in the previous shot. And as we play over to the dark, it's just black. So there's like virtually no noise in the darks by doing that. Now where we're going to get the best is where we give even more exposure and treat it like we're shooting. And look at this, even in the brighter areas, that's a lot cleaner. Now we're playing back the third shot here. Now we're on the third shot here, and the darks are looking even darker. We're getting a little bit of noise up here, a little bit of noise right there, but the darks are really, really clean. And that's what we're going for. We end up getting a really nice clean darks, and it doesn't look really super noisy. We go over to the blacks, and look how clean that is here. Very, very clean. Let's go back to the previous shot here, and now look at all the noise. You can see all that noise. Let's go over to the darks, where it goes over to the dark area, and you can see I can just see a ton of noise in that area there. So let's look at that here compared. Yeah, look at all the noise in that. Whenever I stop, you can see all that noise all over that thing there. And as we go into the darks, look at all the noise just bouncing all over the place. Yeah, hopefully you guys are seeing this. But yeah, when I pause, you can see it's almost like snowflakes all over. Look at all those snowflakes all over. All right, now let's go to the outside footage and look at what we've got, what we've done here. So once again, this is the S-Log footage, and this is kind of the opposite where instead of we're turning down the exposure index, we're turning it up. And the reason why is because if you turn it up, it will look like you need to let less light in, and you'll bring the exposure down, and you'll change the exposure. And what that's going to do is preserve highlights. It's not going to clip the highlights and destroy details in the highlights. So let's take a look at this, our outside stuff. I'm going to copy over this stuff over here, just those looks there, and now I'm going to, so I've got the LUT added there on my second node, and I've got first node, we're going to control exposure. We're going to get all the exposure, kind of the same with the first experiment. We're going to get it to where the exposure looks good, right about there. So that's for the first shot. I'm going to go to the second shot and do the same thing. I'll add this one to both those shots right there. But now I'm going to go to this shot right here. So this is my second one, and I'm going to increase my exposure. Now it looks like it's getting darker, so I'm going to turn this up. And what I did here, rather than change the f-stop, is I put ND filters, and I knocked the light down by one stop each for each time. So here we had it at 8. We were shooting 800, and the exposure index was 800. Right there on the slate. And then the next one was exposure index at 1600. And rather than change the f-stop, what I did outside is I changed the ND. The first one, you'll notice this is a 9. This is the second one at a 0.9. The first one is a 0.6, which is 2 stops. I was getting 2 stops, brought it down 2 stops to get it properly exposed outside. And then I took it down another stop with a 0.9. And so that's going to be darker. And then the last one, I brought it down to, or I added a 1.2, which is, let's see, 9, added one more stop to it because it's 3 stops. 0.6 is 2 stops, 0.9 is 3 stops, and 1.2 is 4 stops. So we started off with a 2 stop with it because it's so bright outside. I brought it down by 2 stops already to get a good exposure at my f-stop of 811 split. And when I went over to, and that seemed to get a good exposure with that ND. So then we dropped it down a stop with this one here with a 0.9, which is 1 stop darker than the 0.6. And from 1.9 to 1.2 is 2 stops darker than the 0.6. So every 0.3 is a stop. So we started with 2, 3 stops, and then 4 stops. So a little confusing, but yeah. Anyway, so let's brighten up this one so it gets. So we're going to try to match the exposure of each one of these frames. And look how it's bringing back the details in the darks here. This is a great feature with the Cine EI. It helps to preserve a lot of those details. Let's look at our face and try to get these exposures so they match. There to there. It's a little brighter, just a little bit darker. Go to this one. That's about a good match there. That's a little brighter here, so we'll bring that down so each one of them is. So we're looking at our skin tone and seeing if we're kind of matching the skin tone brightness levels. It's about the same, and that's about the same exposure there. So let's look at this. Go to the next one. That looks like a match in brightness level, and then the third one that looks like a match in brightness levels. Okay, so let's show what we did on this one here. Shooting at an exposure of 800 ISO and 800 exposure index. So what we're kind of seeing is what we're getting here. And we've already stopped this down at 0.6 just for the brightness level of the sun there because it's so bright outside. But what we want to look at here is let's look at our highlights. What we could look at here and this is the 800 ISO and 800 exposure index. We're exposing this kind of normally, but what you're going to get is like, look at the sun right here. I did this intentionally essentially. You kind of see these highlights, especially on the forehead here. If you're looking at the forehead right there, it's blown out detail. And right here on the shirt especially, it has blown out detail. So here if we're looking at this shot right here, you've got, in the highlights here, you've got some blown out detail. There's no detail left right there. It's just pure white. And right here on our forehead is pure white, like especially right there, it's just pure white. It's no detail left. It looks okay, but this especially looks a little bit blotchy right there. So let's go to our next shot and look at this shot here. And this is looking a little bit better. There's a little slight amount of detail left here. And one thing that we could do to test this is if we want to bring back restore some of our highlights, we can grab this node and drag it down. And I'm just looking at this spot right here to see if the detail comes back. If you get that down low enough, look at that. All the detail comes back. That detail is still there. So if we want to brighten her up, we can brighten her up and keep the highlights down and restore some of those details. Let's look if we can do that on the first clip. This is the second clip, and the exposure index on this one is 1600. Then we're going to go to 3200 index here and compare them. Let's see which ones can restore back. This is the second one right here. Let's go to our first one where we've got this. Look how much more blown out that is, but I'm going to do the same thing, kind of give it the same grace and see if it will restore the detail back. And that is, but we're getting these still little white blots and blotchy dots in there. But this is kind of bringing it back. And if you boost up the mids, it's blown out. It's still blown out there. So if we try to get this up to a normal exposure, let's compare the other one. So this is the first one. This is shot at 800, and this is 800 ISO and 800 ISO index, exposure index. So that's your first one. Go to the second one. And like I said, look at the detail that we're getting back here, about the same exposure, about the same difference here. And then we're going to go to the third one. They had the 3200 ISO index, exposure index. And we'll go to color here, and I'm going to grab this and drag it down and see and look at that. It brings back all that detail right there. All the detail was brought back there. And now I can boost this up here. And let's see which one has the most amount of it. So I've got it about the same brightness level. Let's look at which one has the most blown out detail right there. Let's go to compare that one. That's the second one. A little bit more blown out, but still acceptable amount of detail there, I would say. And then the first one here, doing about the same amount of color correction. This is like blown out right there, completely blown out there. So here on the third one, on the 6400 ISO index, we got some good detail left in there. The first one, the exposure index was at 800, and we got a lot of detail loss on that one. The second one, not as much detail loss at 1600, and a lot less detail loss at 3200. What we were actually doing there, if we turn each one of these nodes off, let's turn off our whole grade right here. And we're going to go to this one, turn off our grade. So each one of these, the grade is turned off. Right there this is the 800 exposure index. This is the 1600 index, and there's the 3200 index. So here it looks like we're a bit overexposed when we're shooting at the proper, when we're shooting at 800, but at 1600, it thinks we're letting a lot more light in, therefore we change it by putting an extra ND on there. And same thing here, it thinks we're shooting at 3200, so we had to put another stop of ND on there to bring it down to get a proper exposure. But this is what is actually happening, even though it looks like it's changing, it's not. It's just dimming it down, so you're preserving those highlights. So it's kind of tricking you, so you can do a lot of this. And this is expecting that you're going to be fixing a lot of this in post-production, rather than try to retain that look in camera. All right, guys, well, that's it for this episode, just kind of showing how the Sony Exposure Index helps with preserving the noise, what helps eliminate the noise in the darks when you're shooting in a very high ISO on your base ISO at 12,800, and also how you can try to preserve the highlights and bring those back and have a better fall off into the whites without completely blowing out your details in the highlights, and that when you're shooting at a lower ISO, which is the base ISO of 800. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. And thank you so much for watching ChineFat.